Hello everybody, thank you for being here tonight. Tonight we are on week number 6 of our In.Form transformation journey. Tonight we've got an exciting night talking about mastering our food environment. Some of the things that we're going to be covering is how we're going to clean out our pantries over the next week. Make sure that we're getting things out that we no longer serve our healthy needs of our body. We're going to talk about labels and how to understand and read labels properly, making sure also that none of us are getting caught in some of the deceptive practices that are used when it comes to labeling ingredients with the FDA and marketing and things along that line. We're also going to be talking about how we can plan, purchase, and prepare to the best of our advantages to make sure that we are doing the best we can at getting in exactly what our bodies need on a regular basis, and not being caught where we don't have the proper foods on hand, or if we're traveling, or if we're just getting through a really crazy hectic week, making sure that we've got some tools set aside where we can make that easier for us to grab the right foods at the right times. Last week, of course, we talked about gut health equals heart health, and learned a little bit about healthy fats and kind of breaking the myth of fats and whatnot, and how we've been kind of indoctrinated to think that fats are really bad, and they're really not. We'll shed a little bit more light on that next week when we talk about the sugar module. But I did want to follow up. Justin, Jennifer's husband, had a question last week about cholesterol levels and about the total number of your cholesterol. If you remember, we talked about the HDL and the LDL primarily being the two main numbers. The third number that you'll see, sometimes it's very minute and sometimes it's not, but it doesn't get looked at a whole lot, are VLDLs. And VLDLs are very low density lipoproteins opposed to the low density lipoproteins or the high density lipoproteins. So the high density proteins are healthy because what they do is they scavenge all that excess cholesterol and bring it back to the liver so it can be processed and then be eliminated. Where the LDL is considered our bad cholesterol, which it takes cholesterol out, which does help us with producing hormones and other cellular membrane functions in the actual body. But the LDLs are actually more of a triglyceride or a fat. They're more of a fatty substance than the cholesterol itself, and it relates directly to triglycerides. So generally, you probably don't see the normal lab report pulling out any information on LDL because, VLDL, because they're actually going to be focusing more on the triglyceride number. And so if you cannot get that VLDL number down, that third figure in that total cholesterol number, it's probably because your triglycerides are high and you're having a hard time maybe removing that number to a more adequate number. So just wanted to make sure I share that extra information. I appreciate Justin bringing that up because I got to learn a little bit more myself about how all that works together. But it is a triglyceride number that we would really want to look at if somebody does have a high VLDL, or if it doesn't change as it did in Justin's case after his change in life. All right, so with that being said, I wanted to mention a couple other things real quick. I don't think I sent you guys any text because I was going to let Shiree talk to y'all about that. But Nature's Sunshine is having a big special this week, so if anybody is in any more need of any of their protein shakes or supplements or anything like that, Nature's Sunshine has $20 off a $125 order, $40 off a $200 order, and then $120 off a $500 order, all of that going on through the 19th. And if you order tonight before midnight, you can get free shipping also. So that's one of the best deals that they ever have. So I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. If that's something you're interested in, please let Shiree or myself know, and we can help make sure you get the most out of that. Let's see. I'll leave that right there. I think that's it for that. All right. So I like to start off this week just remembering that it takes 21 days to create a habit, and it takes 90 days to create a lifestyle. We're into week 6 now of our In.Form transformation journey. Hopefully we've been able to establish some habits that are different from when we first joined. Maybe we're doing our protein shakes on a pretty regular basis, or maybe we are getting protein in within the mornings pretty regularly. But I really want you to look back and kind of see what kind of habits that you've established over the next 21 days, so you can give yourself a pat on your back and realize This is progress, not perfection, but the little bits of progress that we do on a regular basis is really super important. Nice job, Tom. Give her a good pat from me too, because I know she's been learning. All right, so this is also a really good time for us to evaluate our 90-day goals. So if you remember the very first week, I challenged each one of you to set a 90-day goal for what you wanted to see happen with this particular program, and or where you wanted to see yourself at the end of the 13 weeks. And so you should have written that at the end of module number 1 in your IN.Form participant manuals under the SMART goals section, because we weren't doing SMART goals yet at that time. So please make sure you go back this week as part of your homework and check that 90-day goal. For some of you, it may have shifted and it may have changed. For those of you maybe who came in saying, well, I would like to lose 20 pounds, that may have shifted as you learn that it's not the weight that we're concerned about, but it's the total body constitution that we're concerned about. Your goal may be completely the same as it was, but it's always really good for us to evaluate our goals, our bigger goals, as we go through any process to make sure A, we're on track, and or B, if we need to have any adjustments to that 90-day goal. So please take time this week as part of your homework to evaluate that 90-day goal, make adjustments if necessary, or just get them reinforced in your brain, or put something up on the wall with it, or whatever you need to do, so that way you can remember why you're on this transformation journey in the first place. All right. So one other thing that I've noticed with that daily checklist, I have some people who are not getting real specific on the SMART goals. They're doing real generalized goals, and I mean, goals are great, but what we're trying to do with the SMART goals is create little goals. So we have little things to focus on all week long, opposed to trying to create this big, I want a healthy life, I think is what I saw in something, you know. I mean, it's a great goal, but it doesn't really tell us how we can get from point A to point B effectively. You know, so if you're needing to get that protein in the morning, write that down. You know, get my protein in every single morning, you know, within an hour of waking up, or, you know, getting my 80 ounces of water in every day. I mean, just get specific, make sure it's measurable, make sure it's something that you can be accountable for. It's not something Susie's doing for Tom or Tom's doing for Susie. You know, make sure it's something you are accountable for, and make sure it's realistic and it's time bound. So time bound meaning within the week is what we want to look at. That 90-day goal is what we've set aside for the whole program, but each week we want to set those little tiny SMART goals throughout the week, okay? All right. This is a really good time to bring in a protein discussion. I saw this big time last night when we did our BioTracker assessments. I saw a lot of people losing some muscle mass, and of course weight and body fat went kind of all over the place. Did some different things, went up for some people, went down for some other people. But we did see that sometimes about week 6, it's pretty common. People get kind of lax with their protein. They don't necessarily realize, you know, how much is affecting them, especially for people who are maybe feeling like they don't have their energy, or they don't have the focus, or they don't have the stamina that they used to. And so I like to bring a story of a young gal that I worked with at the very beginning when I first started coaching IN.Form. She was 28 at the time, and primarily vegetarian. So we were always constantly working to get in more protein for her from plant sources and protein shakes and whatnot. And she was going to college, had a job, nannied on the weekend. I mean, the girl was like never home. And if she was home, it was just to sleep and take a shower and get up and do it all over again the next day. And she's always had a lot of high energy since I've known her. And anyway, she came to me at about week 6 and said, you know what, I'm tired. I can't keep up with the kids on the weekend. You know, I just don't feel as focused. I mean, she just really was like, what's going on, you know? And I said, well, how much protein are you getting in? And she's taller than I am, and she's a little bigger boned as I am as well. So, I mean, it's not a little petite person that can just go on a low amount of protein. I mean, she needed more protein. She was doing about 50 to 60 grams of protein per day. And I told her, I said, I tell you what, I need you to go ahead and up your protein, and let's see what happens. See if that's our trigger. And sure enough, she increased her protein to 90 to 100 grams per day. And in 48 hours, she had gotten back to me and said, guess what? And I said, what? She goes, I feel like Superwoman. And I'm like, really? And these are her actual comments. She said, I've got more energy, I'm in a better mood, I have more stamina, I'm sleeping better, and I feel like Superwoman, is what she said. But she was telling me about how they were running around the block or something with the children on the weekend, and she was able to like surpass them and go right on by them where they've been, you know, beating her every single time before, you know. But it was just a perfect example that, you know, just that little tiny bit of increase of protein made a huge difference in her day. And I just want to take this time to really, really put in there that we need to be really focusing on that. If we're traveling, we still need to get our protein in. If we're having to go out to eat a lot, we still need to get our protein in. It's going to help us sustain our mood, our energy, and our focus as we get through this program, and it's going to keep us encouraged. So just want to make sure that we're all on page with that specifically. I also want to do an exercise check right now. I want everybody to evaluate how much exercise you're doing in a week now compared to at the beginning of the program. And if it hasn't changed any or it's not any different, then we really need to take a look at that also. Exercising on a regular basis, even if it's just getting some walking in 20 minutes a day, 3 or 4 days a week, literally will change your progress in this program because that will get things moving in the right direction. So if you're not getting any more exercise in now than you were at week 1, you're actually shortchanging yourself. And I know the weather's getting a little cold out there. We may have to make some adjustments to actually how we get our exercise in. But please make sure you're really taking a look at that. It makes a really big difference. I'm a perfect example. I get going with soccer practices, soccer games all week long, teaching classes, homeschooling, and then I'm like, okay, you know, I can't go to the YMCA and get my 30, 40 minutes workout in like I like to, so I don't go. So what I started doing recently, and I did it before I even came here, I just went for 15 minutes. And I mean, I only got 15 minutes in on the elliptical. To me, I would rather have a lot more than that, but that's all I had time for. But yet, I still made a difference by going and doing it, just by getting in there and getting some exercise in. So, I mean, even if it has to be a little bit of time, it still counts. It makes a really big difference. And I know the other reason it's making a difference because I'm on week 4 of that Purify 2.0 program, and I've really noticed that, you know, I'm starting to like lose weight that I wasn't losing before, and I know it's just because I've also just upped my workouts just 15 minutes at a time, you know, a couple of days a week more than what I was doing before. So anyway, just want to make sure we do an exercise check. All right. Anybody have any question on fats or oils from last week? I mean, that was a pretty intense subject understanding. I just want to make sure that all questions are answered on fats and oils. We covered it shouldn't be an oil. Go ahead.
I tried to share with him what we covered on that.
Okay.
And the list of healthy plant-based
It's not
oils.
difficult. You cook the food, I eat the food. Whatever you give me, I eat.
Okay, so like for instance, when you do any frying, what you want to be doing is you want to use a oil that has a high heat compatibility, because when you heat any of your basic oils, such as your olive oil and your coconut oil, even your safflower oil, the oils actually go rancid with heat. So if you're going to be doing any high level of cooking with your oils, you want to use grapeseed oil or avocado oil. Those are your 2 best ones. You want to say it's olive oil for more like sauteing, you know, where you don't have a real high heat or the heat is just for a short amount of time, because the longer that oil sits in that heat, the longer it goes rancid and actually is no longer healthy for us. Another highlight was making sure that we keep all of our oils purchased in glass containers, because the oils themselves will leach the toxicity out of the plastic, and then that creates a problem for us as well. Okay, so those are a couple highlights. Does that kind of help a little bit? Yep, okay. Coconut oil for baking, but you would never want to fry in it type thing, you know. Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, as Shiree was sharing with us last week, is kind of a farce in this particular country, but if you're purchasing extra virgin olive oil from Italy, you can probably pretty much bet you're getting a lot better high quality product because of the regulations and rules, which we're going to talk about more tonight. Okay? All right. If we don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and go to module number 6, Mastering Our Food Environment, page number 47 in your In.Form Transformation Journal, or not journal, but participant manual rather, excuse me. I was thinking food journal there for a moment. All right, so every solid system needs a foundation, and nutrition is no different. We need to get a solid foundation going with our nutrition, and we're going to make sure we establish that tonight. Your external food environment will reflect the ecosystem that's inside your body. So literally we're going to talk about how what we see around us in our food environment literally is going to reflect what's going on in here, and we're going to address that tonight. Page number 48 is time for a food audit. This is going to be one of your biggest weeks of homework that you've had so far in the In.Form Transformation journey, is you are going to take some time, whether it's an hour or 2 hours, depending on how much food you've got stored in pantries, refrigerators, cabinets, wherever they may be. And we're going to really look at those labels, and we're going to determine whether it's something that needs to stay or it needs to go. So you need to get some boxes out if you're going to take it to and give it away to a charity, or if you're going to do a trash bag, do a trash bag. But you need to get yourself prepared so that way you can move the things out that don't need to be there. We're going to open up all of our kitchen cabinets and pantries, refrigerators, and we're going to start with the obvious offenders, the cookies, the chips, candies, anything that doesn't serve us well, dried fruit, sodas, fruit juices, things like that are not going to serve us well at this time, so we're going to be getting rid of them. We're going to go through our labels, and we're going to check our labels and make sure they're compatible with our In.Form nutritional plan. And of course, we'll talk more about that tonight so you can be very confident. The biggest thing is, when in doubt, throw it out. So if you look at it and you're like, well, it's got this, I know it has a little bit of that, but it's got this, it needs to go out. If there's doubt, it needs to go, okay? Leave your healthiest snacks available, your fresh vegetables, your raw fruits, raw nuts, things like that, that can really help us move forward on our In.Form journey. And of course, add your favorite In.Form shakes and get ready to go shopping. But before you do that, let's talk about labels. So page number 49. Before I get into this, there's one other key thing that I really think that people need to be aware of. And that is the nutrients, or calories per nutrients. Okay, so we can get a little bit better idea. This is not in your book, so I'm giving you this information extra. But we need to be doing whenever you eat protein, okay, you're getting 4 calories per gram of protein. So every time you eat a gram of protein, you're getting 4 calories. When you eat a gram of carbohydrates, such as oatmeal, breads, rice, things along that line, you're actually going to be getting, there again, 4 calories per gram. All right? Fats, on the other hand, you get 9 calories per gram of fat, because fats are more dense when it comes to calories. And that's one of the reasons why, even though we're getting 5 oils per day, or not oils, but fats per day, why the serving sizes are smaller is because they are packed full of calories. So we do need to be aware of that. But this is important to know as we're reading our labels, and you'll soon find out why here in a moment. So page number 49, the first thing we're going to look at is the little green stripe at the very top. This is your serving size, and this is really super important, because just by looking at this alone, a lot of times you can decide when you're in the grocery store whether it goes in the basket potentially or it does not, just by looking at a serving size. Serving sizes can be very deceptive and can really throw us off. You may look at a box of mac and cheese and think, oh, well, I need 4 of those to feed my family of 4. When in actuality, you look at the serving size, and of course, you're like 4 servings per box. And it's just not an adequate equation, basically, to what the reality is for some of us, especially if you've got growing boys in your family. I can attest to that one. So we're looking at this particular product here. We've got 1 cup as a serving size, and we've got 4 servings in this particular product. Now keep in mind, all of the numbers underneath are all related to the serving size. They're not related to the whole thing. So if you would look at this particular product, and you say, you know what, I would eat that whole thing at one time. You would literally be eating 4 servings, which means you would need to multiply 4 times on all of these figures underneath, all right? This is also something we need to look at. Remember we talked last week about trans fats and how a lot of times you'll see on the label 0 trans fats per serving. This is one of the ways they can get by with saying it has no trans fats because it has a negligible amount per serving, but your per serving is really not the typical amount a person would eat. So therefore this negligible amount now comes into a more realistic, more harmful amount just because of what's happening with our particular labels that are being put out there for us. So please pay attention to that. The next thing we want to look at is the calories. Calories, even though we're not counting calories, it's important to know where the calories are coming from. This particular product here has 70 calories from fat. One serving is 150 calories, but 70 of them, nearly half, are coming from fat alone. This is when we need to ask the question, what kind of fat is it? Is it a healthy fat? Is it not a healthy fat? And if I were to eat all 4 servings at one sitting, I mean, that means I'm getting quite a bit of calories just from a fat. So we really need to pay attention to that. The next thing that's not highlighted that I do want to make note of is a percent of daily value. And I'd like to bring this one out also because when you see percent of daily value, this is based on a 2,000 calorie nutritional plan per day. So it's for the average person who eats 2,000 calories per day. I think most of you would probably check your BioTracker assessments and you would see that your calories that you probably need to sustain your body are a lot more than 2,000 calories a day. So it's actually a really low figure, and these numbers are based on that 2,000 calorie. So even though the numbers may look right, when you realize they're based on a 2,000 a day calorie diet, that it really may not be in the right perspective that we're looking for. So just to keep that in mind. The yellow area, of course, is areas that we really want to limit these nutrients. We want to be careful with fats. And even more so, we want to be careful with saturated fats and trans fats, as we talked about last week. But this really tells us what's going on with saturated fat. I like to bring this up when we look at our percent of daily value. So if you eat 1 serving of this product, you're getting 25% of your daily recommended value of saturated fat based on a 2,000 calorie day diet. If you eat this whole box or container of 4 servings, how much do you get? 100%. 100% of your daily recommended value of saturated fat in one day. And that's where we need to be careful at, because that changes the whole ball game right there. I mean, you gotta be careful about any kind of saturated fat you eat the rest of the day, because if you're eating a 2,000 calorie day a diet, right, then that right there would blow that up. Of course, we want to be careful with cholesterol, even though we found out last week we really primarily make most of our cholesterol, but we do want to be cautious of that, especially if we have high cholesterol levels and we're not getting the plant sterols in to block that. And then sodium, of course, is really important as well. I mean, there's a lot of hidden salts and sodium in all sorts of different products, and if you've got high blood pressure tendencies or kidney issues of any kind, we want to make sure that we're really limiting that sodium intake. Next, we've got the blue area, and the blue area is the nutrients we really want to look for. These are nutrients we just don't typically get a lot of. We need the dietary fiber. We need the vitamin A, the vitamin C, the iron, the phosphorus, the calcium. All sorts of things are really needed for us on a regular basis. So we really want to look for those and see where does this fall in line. So this particular product doesn't have any fiber in it, which is probably okay because maybe it's not a fiber-based product. But it does have 12 grams of sugar, by the way. I don't know why they didn't highlight that. Of course, we'll talk more about that next week. Maybe that's why they didn't do that. But we really want to make sure that we're getting plenty of these nutrients, and especially if it's a processed food, we want to be looking at this. If it has very little nutrient levels of these particular things, then it's probably not a good idea. It's probably not going to serve our bodies in the manner in which we want it to. And then the last one, which is really super important as well, is the ingredient list. This is another way that you can look at a product really quickly and decipher whether you need to give it more time or you just need to put it back on the shelf and move on. Because the ingredient list and the serving sizes are really going to help guide you, especially if you're like me, you don't have a lot of time in the grocery store to spend looking at a bunch of labels, you know. So it really, if you hone in on those 2 areas, that's going to help you out quite a bit. The ingredient list, of course, we have to understand is always listed in order of density of the ingredient. So the very first product in the ingredient list, very first ingredient in the product list. Did I say that right? You guys understand?
Yes, I got it.
Listening to myself in my head and what I'm saying out loud is two different things sometimes. We have to realize that that first ingredient is the most that that particular product has of. So if, like, for instance, this one has cultured, pasteurized grade A non-fat milk, there's more of that in it than there is high fructose corn syrup or pectin or nutmeg or anything like that. And they are listed in order of density. Now, one of the things you can do is really concentrate on the first three things that are in there, because that product is primarily going to probably be made of the first three items in that list. And if those are things that don't work for you, and we're going to learn more about the hidden names of sugar next week, but if you see that product, or ingredient number 1 and ingredient number 3 are both sugar products, you know you're not going to want to get it because it's not doing you any good. The other thing to look at is the end of what's at the very end. Things like aspartame, things like a NutraSweet. Those tiny things, it doesn't take much of anything to put those in a product, especially when it's a sugar-free product. So be sure you look at the end of the list also. You'll also see food colorings and food dyes there as well at the end of the list. So I always look at the beginning of the list and the end of the list if it's a list that, you know, I'm trying to evaluate if it's appropriate for myself or my family. I do have a saying, though, when it comes to grocery store shopping and reading labels. If the ingredient list is too long for you to stand there and read the whole thing, or if you don't know how to pronounce most of the words in the ingredient list, or even a couple of them actually, right? Or if you don't know what they are, if you don't know what that ingredient is, most likely it just needs to stay on the shelf and not in your grocery cart. We need to be really looking for wholesome foods that have 1, 2, and 3 ingredients in it, and that's it. We really need to be focusing on those because they're going to be less processed. They're going to have a lot less hidden preservatives or colorings or dyes or sugars in them than with something that has a really long list. So those are some things to really be careful of. Something else we need to be careful of is food colorings and food dyes. Food colorings are actually a petroleum-based ingredient made from the same stuff that we make tar and asphalt and gasoline with. And we see a lot of this, especially in our children's products. How many of you have seen a green yogurt before? Do you know of a cow that's green that produces green yogurt? What they're doing is they're doing it to get our children to eat the healthy food of the yogurt because it's fun. In addition to that, for those people who do celebrate holidays, especially when you look at Halloween, then you look at Thanksgiving, and then you look at Christmas, then you look at Valentine's Day, then you look at Easter, and then you look at the birthday party that happens somewhere in there for the child themselves and for all the other children that they probably attended. Think about how much food coloring our children get. One of the #1 reasons why children are the #1 sufferer of leukemia is because of food colorings and food dyes. These products actually manipulate the bone marrow where the red blood cells are made and alter that process. And when we constantly put food colorings and food dyes in front of our children, they're more susceptible because they're growing. And so that's one of the reasons why this is so highly linked to leukemia for children. There's another study done. Children who ate 3 or more hot dogs per week had a 40% higher chance of leukemia. 3 hot dogs, that's not very many. And hot dogs are full of coloring and nitrates. And of course, they're highly processed. So there's no doubt why this is happening to our children. Okay? Food colorings, like I said, are one of the things we really need to take care of. And the other option that we do have, there are some natural food colorings out there. They use red beets, they use different colored actual plants where they can actually color things. But really, honestly, every time we turn around, we're seeing our children exposed to more food colorings. And even go to Walmart, they want to give you a sucker. You know, I mean, forget the sugar is full of food colorings and food dyes. So we really need to pay attention to this. I mean, when you go to the grocery store, when you go down the aisle, the children who are going to be attracted to color. So they're making everything colorful. It's just more fun. But we're really hurting our children in the long run. And so I really want to make sure I address this with us this week. All right. So some other labeling things I want you to be aware of. Natural. And I kind of touched on this a little bit last week, but I'm going to make sure I hit this home tonight. Literally, according to the FDA, a product only has to be 10% natural for you to write the word natural on the front of the product box. So it can say natural, but yet it doesn't have to be 100% natural. It only has to be 10%, and that could be anything. And this gets us into a lot of trouble. The other thing that can get us into a lot of trouble is pictures. I don't know how many of you have seen an egg carton with this wonderful looking picture of a farm and chickens just running around, no pens, no cages, nothing. And it does this thing in our head where we perceive that these eggs that we're buying are coming from this wonderful farm where the chickens get to peck on gravel and anything else they choose to peck on. And that's not necessarily true. Even the word free roaming, it sounds great, but what does free roaming mean? It means they're not in a one-by-one cage, or they're not flocked all sorts, all smashed together like sardines. That's what that means. They just maybe have a little bit of space to walk around. The way that the FDA sets up these rules for these different manufacturers and producers really can deceive us as in a public. And so we really need to take a look at that when we're looking at and making sure we're not thinking, oh, okay, well, this looks good, but is it good? Access to sunlight. I love this one. Access to sunlight, what, through a window?
I read it.
How many of us can get adequate amounts of vitamin D just from a window? You don't, right? How can the chickens get that either? So we really need to tear apart some of these words and make sure that we're not getting deceived with the products that we're purchasing. Of course, I highly recommend getting to know a farmer or getting to know somebody down the road or being in a community that can raise some foods together. I mean, I don't know what you guys can figure out, but I do know that that is the best ultimate way to purchase our foods. A lot of us, that's just not feasible, so we really need to increase our awareness when it comes to the grocery stores and find our farmers markets and find our little places that have some things that are brought farm to table. So that way we have access to those things on a regular basis, especially the things you eat a lot of. If you go through 5 dozen eggs a week with your family, you need to make sure that those eggs are clean. Because you've got to remember, if those chickens are eating corn, GMO corn, guess what you're eating when you eat their eggs? GMO corn. Not just the tissue or the flesh of the animal if you're eating chicken itself, but you're getting it in the eggs also. So we really need to take a look at the foods that you're eating high amounts of. I like cheese. I like cheese. I love cheese. But cheese is full of antibiotics, full of hormones, full of GMOs that have been fed to the cow. So even though it's coming in the milk, I'm still getting GMOs if they ate a GMO product, right? Corn, soy, which we'll talk about more in a moment. So you really, so when I buy cheese, I make sure I buy the best kind of cheese I possibly can. Because I know that that's something I'm going to want to eat a lot of, and if I'm going to eat a lot of it, it needs to be the best thing I can possibly do. Does that make sense? Another one. Trans fats, we talked about that last week. We're good on that. Fair trade is another one. Now, fair trade I actually am in very big support of, as well as sustainably grown, because usually sustainably grown means a very good thing as well. It means somebody who's got some ideas of how to actually grow things without adding chemicals and pulling in outside fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides. Everything's used on the farm itself there. But fair trade is a word that highly, you see this a lot in coffee beans. And basically what this means is that when they have a fair trade label, what they're doing is they are purchasing from usually a little single farmer or family farm, and wherever they're getting it from, and that particular farm, that family is getting a fair trade for their product. They're getting paid adequately. A lot of times, especially like with your big coffee people, Maxwell and Folgers, they're not honoring any of the family farms. They've got these huge coffee bean farms going on that are all commercially grown, and or they're not taking care of the small farmers that are actually doing it. So fair trade is a really good word, actually, especially when it comes to coffee beans. Grass-fed. This is one of my favorite ones to hit hard on. A lot of my people last night had come already to the Purified 2.0 class that I had a couple weeks ago, and we talked a lot about glyphosate. Glyphosate, of course, is the main chemical ingredient in Roundup. And so the reason I'm bringing this story to light is because grass-fed beef is a really big thing right now. And it's been a really big thing for the last couple of years. But grass-fed beef doesn't necessarily mean that the animal has been fed grass its whole entire life. Grass-fed just means it's been given grass, which is its natural food. Okay? Normal food for a cow is grass. All right? Not corn, not soy, not any of these other things. But it just means they've been given grass. It doesn't mean that they haven't been given the corn and the soy and everything else. And then you've got, some people who will say, primarily grass-fed, or I think you can actually say grass-fed even if the last 90 days when you finish them out before slaughter, you can give them grain to beef them up, to make them bigger for more money.
What if they now say organic grass-fed?
So that's a great question. Grass-fed still applies, as we're talking about right now. Organic only means supposedly that if they are being fed any kind of corn or soy, that it's supposed to be an organic feed. But that doesn't necessarily apply to the grass as much. And I'll explain that in a moment. But your other thing you want to look at, Susie, is who said it was organic. And we're going to talk about that more also. That's the other question. Okay? When I was at Natural Grocers last Friday, I actually saw a beef product, and it said 100% grass-fed. And so that actually was on the label. It was one of the first times I actually had seen that, which means it had grass from start to finish, 100% the whole entire time. But that label can probably still be played with a little bit, so I still would be really careful. Now, the problem with grass-fed is they still use Roundup on their grass fields to get rid of weeds. So even though it sounds great that they're eating grass, you can still be getting the highly concentrated chemical of glyphosate in your grass-fed beef. When I first got off of being a vegetarian for 5 years and I started eating a little meat here and there, I would only eat grass-fed meat from Australia that I was getting at Whole Foods in Austin. And that was the only place you could get grass-fed at that time, was from Australia. Australia and New Zealand are one of the 2 countries in the world to do the best ultimate processing of their beef and their cattle with no hormones, no antibiotics, and really making sure that they're humane and taking care of the animals properly. So, I would pay a lot of money for this little tiny piece of filet mignon that came from Australia. But it was good, and it processed in my body really fast because it didn't have a lot of chemicals in it. Now, here we are, 15 years later, and you can find grass-fed everywhere. You can even find it in Walmart. And we were in Gatesville, Texas a couple of years ago, and we were unloading some of our organic alfalfa to a new customer who raised cattle, and he was needing a bunch of alfalfa, and so we had about 200 bales to load up for him, and I was helping Michael with the process. And in the process, of course, you get to talking to somebody and kind of getting a feeler for where people are at. And I said something to him, so what are you feeding? He goes, well, I'm feeding my cattle. I said, oh, really? I said, are you butchering them yourself? He goes, no, I'm taking them to Austin. He goes, those people in Austin, they will pay big bucks for grass-fed food. He didn't know who I was or where I came from or anything like that. So I kind of just let him keep talking because I kind of wanted to see what his aspect was as somebody who was growing this high-quality grass-fed beef. And he goes, yeah, they pay big bucks, I'm like, well, that's cool, they do it because it's healthier, you get more omegas, you get more nutrients, vitamins, minerals are all in that meat than you would get if it was corn and soy fed. So that's wonderful. And we kept unloading, and he said, I have to get all this alfalfa because my fields got rained out and I couldn't get in them to spray them. And I said, spray them? I said, what are you spraying them with? He goes, well, with, Roundup. You know, he goes, but I couldn't get into them this year, you know, because it was too wet, so I wasn't able to get my grass. And I mean, my jaw dropped. I mean, I had to turn around. I was like, what did I just hear? And it really hit me at that point in time. And it's not like he was doing it on purpose. You know, I really didn't feel that sense from him. It's just, we're just not aware of what's happening with our grass. Another thing that happens is when the USDA certifies a fertilizer as organic, the only thing that makes it organic is that it comes out the back end of the animal. It doesn't mean the animal was fed organic. It means what comes out of the back end has been processed already, so therefore it's organic. And through the USDA laws, when you certify with the USDA, they actually will encourage you to use the feces from animals that are not organic on your crops, that you're grazing organically to sell in the marketplace. And it's totally okay to do. So here you are thinking you're buying something organic, and then you find out later, you know, that literally that what they're doing is they're allowing these non-organic products. Because when it comes out the back end, it's still not organic.
Aren't they in a pasture?
Hmm?
Aren't they in pasture? Why would they need to spray the grass in a pasture?
It depends on the animal. Well, I mean, if you're making beef, I mean, you're gonna have to keep them in some kind of a pen and you gotta feed them a lot. You know, so a lot of times, I mean, you have to have a huge amount of massive land of grass, and you've got to actually force them to eat more. You know, so really, you know, having that kind of acreage is a challenge, especially if you're a small farmer. And then B, you know, if you want to have the highest dress out, you're going to want to feed them something else besides just grass. So
And when you say grass, you're talking any kind of grass.
Bermuda, coastal,
ryegrass.
rye,
Yeah.
you name it, straw, wheat straw. Which brings me to another thing that would happen. One of the guys that I was talking to, I think it's an Amish community, but they have like a little, outside of Waco, Texas, they have like a little restaurant and a garden supply place. I mean, it's neat. They all work together and making things as clean as possible. He actually knew one of the guys in Texas that helped expose. They were using the fecal matter from the racehorses in San Antonio, and they were packaging it up that up as organic and allowing it to go out as organic. And of course, horses eat a lot of what? Grass. A lot of grass, a lot of alfalfa too. So
Well,
just
they give them all kinds of supplements.
and
To
supplements.
beef them up for the racing too.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Thank you. I didn't think about that, but you're correct.
Especially race horses.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, whatever they can get away with to
Yeah.
to boost their.
Exactly.
It's
Because
like
they're an
just
athlete
like
in an animal
athletes.
form. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. I didn't think about that. Another thing that I had seen, I was doing some experimentation with bale gardening. Have you guys ever heard of bale gardening? Where you take a bale of hay and you actually plant your plants inside the bale of hay, and it's great for aeration of the roots, and it helps with moisture control, and you get nutrient fertilizer, everything's all right in there. So I started doing some investigation on it because I started wanting to do it myself with our alfalfa. And I came across one of his master gardeners. He'd been a master gardener for decades. And he had an article up that he had purchased a bunch of straw bales, and he was going to do bale gardening, and as he'd been doing before. And he purchased like $1,000 worth of plants, or he said he had $1,000 invested in his plants, and then actually started to plant the plants and get them all going, and none of them took off. None of them made it. He couldn't figure out why. Well, when he went to look at the source of the straw itself had glyphosate on it, and glyphosate does not leave the earth for at least 10 years. So the whole spot of land where he had his bale gardening at, with this glyphosate in it, literally ruined the whole area up underneath those bales. And he was unable to grow anything at all. And of course he lost his whole crop. So that's some other things that are happening, and just to make us aware of where this glyphosate is happening at and why it's so dangerous for us.
I think to help answer her question, just not about Roundup, when you with grass, you're also bugs, worms, like right now, they've been planting rye, and wheat. The farmers have been having problem with worms eating the rye and the wheat, so then they bring a rig in to spray it, so they're putting a different kind of, I don't know what chemical it is.
I know they've had something in the news recently about Roundup
Yeah.
in a negative
Yeah.
light, but.
I showed a video last Wednesday night about a man who finally won a lawsuit against Monsanto. He has got cancer, terminal cancer, and he won $289 million. He is the first person to win a lawsuit against Monsanto. There is currently over 5,000 cases of people suing Monsanto because the damaging effects is huge. And in fact, I was preparing for that class last week, and I talked to Michael on the phone. He was in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is a huge farming community. He was saying that the commercials on the TV down there were lawyers saying, if you've been affected by glyphosate, call us.
Yeah.
So all sorts of people jumping in on it.
Monsanto
Don't
is
they supply
big.
a lot of the cultures for a lot of dairy products, Monsanto?
Probably. I don't know for certain on that one,
So
but
somebody was saying to stay away from certain dairy products. This is a while back. It was someone that was real big into the natural foods, organic things you're talking about. And
Yeah.
she was complaining about Monsanto, and that was one of the things that she was saying.
yeah. Well, and that's just it. Monsanto, when it originally started, it was all to feed the world. I mean, it was to stop the starvation, to stop, the famine that was going on in the world because they were mass producing these seeds. And GMOs, of course, genetically modified organisms, basically change the molecular structure of the plant itself. I mean, there's one thing to hybrid a particular fruit or vegetable, but it's another thing when you take a gene from another animal species and then you implement it right along with that plant species. I mean, you completely created something that never existed any way, shape, or form as the creator put it out there in the first place. So therefore, I mean, it's a really big deal, to have this out. And that's one of the next things that's on my list, and I usually save this for the last, is that GMOs have been put out since the 1990s in heavy doses, and the top 3 things that they make in this country that are GMO are corn, soy, and cotton. Most likely all of us have eaten GMO today, and most likely all of us are wearing GMO cotton right now. It's everywhere. One of the reasons some of the trades with the UN and with Europe and other big countries are not happening, they don't want our corn, they don't want our soy, they don't want our cotton, because it's all GMO. And there's heavy regulations about GMOs in the other countries compared to here. In our country, we don't have to, there's no labeling restrictions. You don't have to put GMO on the label. But in Europe, if you go to a restaurant in Europe and they're serving a food product with a GMO ingredient, they have to list it on the menu, because they're giving you the choice as the consumer whether you want that or not. We currently don't have the freedom of that in our country. There's been a lot of people pressing for it for a really long time. In fact, when Obama was in office, he got a deal going where, the little barcode scan on the foods. Well, what they had to do is they had to have some kind of a computer link, internet link to that scan. So when you scan the product, it would tell you if it had GMO in it or not. But the thing is, most of us aren't going to stand there and scan a product before we purchase it, and then try and get through the app and figure out all of that, right? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. Yeah, and I was talking to one of my clients today. She goes, I just have a flip phone. Well, yes, I know. But anyway, just things like that. I mean, it's just putting us in a position where we don't know. If you want to make sure you're getting something that pretty much is guaranteed to not have GMOs in it, you want to look for the Verified GMO Project. It's kind of like a little upside down triangle. They got a little check mark inside of it. But the Verified GMO Product is an independent organization separate from the FDA and the government that literally goes through high processes and standards to make sure that the foods that go through their project and labeling are not GMO oriented. Currently, the USDA's organic, this goes back to your question earlier, Susie. Currently with the USDA, they allow a small percentage, any up to 1 to 3% of GMOs in our organic products. So even though you're buying an organic product that's labeled by the USDA organic, it can still potentially have 1 to 3% of GMOs in it. And a lot of the reasoning being is because, you know, they share the same grain bins, and then we got the bees, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So you really want to look for USDA organic, or not USDA organic, but organic from third-party people like Oregon Tilth. There's one by out of Canada. Or look at even from other countries. Like for me, cheese, I was telling you how cheese is one of my favorite things to do. There's a really good Parmesan cheese at Jumbo's that I really like to use in our pasta dishes, but it's from Italy. So I'll use it because I know that it has to be labeled GMO to be sold over here. So there again, you need to be careful because sometimes those cheese products, they make it look like it's from way over there and it's really not, you know. But that's the only time we'll ever buy anything that's not labeled clean if it's from another country, and I know that country has high standards of it. And GMOs are taking over at a mass production. And the problem is that not only does it ruin the soil and destroy the nutrients in the soil, but it actually gets into other farmers' acreages and pastures and farms and gets them in trouble. Monsanto has won a lot of farms over the last couple of decades because of bees. Bees pollinate. So if you've got GMO or corn grower over here, and you've got this farmer over here that says, no, I'm not doing GMOs, but he's growing corn, the bees that travel back and forth will actually share that pollen back and forth. And that's besides the fact of any seeds of any kind of produce, or not produce, but crops that may blow back and forth. Birds picking up seeds and taking them here and there. But the bees are a really big deal. So what ended up happening is a lot of small farmers that had family farms for 100 years or more lost their farms because supposedly, you know, Monsanto's got a patent on those GMO seeds, and they literally took their farms.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they could do about it because they didn't have the money.
On that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we're losing even more family farms. It's not just because it's hard to make it these days as a family farm, but you've got these big corporations that are just waiting to take what you've got so they can mass produce at a whole other level. So honey was something we talked about last night, actually, and Jennifer mentioned something earlier, so I'm definitely going to bring this up. So the thing with honey, I mean, is the bees. There again, I mean, you can't really purchase organic honey unless these bees are actually in a contained environment, which, you know, bees really probably shouldn't be contained in an environment. But even when you're getting, whenever you're getting honey even locally, I mean, you don't know where those bees are going and what kind of things they're picking up, because if they pick up a GMO alfalfa or GMO wheat or GMO whatever, I mean, that's going to be in your honey also. And we're actually seeing a lot of bee populations dwindling very, very quickly. And there's been a big question, why? Why? And I would venture to say it's because of GMOs. We're having a lot of children with health problems that are unexplainable. For any children that are born from 1990 and on, their level of exposure to GMOs is huge. Huge, unless you had a parent that was really, really careful and knew what was going on back in the 90s. But it's big money right now. And now it's gotten to the point where it's actually destroyed places in Africa. I was reading about a couple of tribes over there that had produced like the best cotton everywhere. I mean, it was just, this cotton was like luxurious and beautiful. It just had, I don't know, anything but the strands that were wonderful. And they've been known in the world for their high quality, cotton. Well, they had a couple of rough seasons, and they were approached by some company that had to do with Monsanto. And they went ahead and purchased the GMO seed, and they ended up losing everything in their family farms because that completely destroyed what they had before. So we really need to be careful with GMOs. Back in 2010, I was teaching a class called No-Nos for the Kiddos, and GMOs were like number 10 on my top 10 list. GMOs are now on my #1 list. This is the thing you need to look for the most and make sure it is not in your foods. If it has corn or corn syrup or cotton or soy of any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't make you feel really good about the fact it doesn't have a GMO in it, then it does. It just simply does. And we need to stay away from it. There's actually a new disease that's out called Mangello's disease. Mangello's, something like that. And it's where these little tiny fibers actually come out of your skin. And they're relating that to a potential GMOs and chemtrails, is what they're thinking that is at this point in time. It's not been verified, but that's the only correlation that they can really see what's happening. But the skin has little pieces like fiberglass basically coming out of the skin. So there's a lot of things that we're yet to see, I think, with GMOs, but the more we can shut it down now, especially for our children, is really super important. I'm going to give you guys a couple of flyers here, and this is how to avoid GMOs. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list by any means. There's a lot more things. I mean, you find GMOs even in your batteries, in your condiments. I mean, food starch, modified starch, everything. Oils, canola oil is one of the worst ones. Don't ever buy canola oil, by the way. I forgot to say that last week. Canola oil needs to stay completely out of your cabinets whatsoever. But this list will give you kind of an idea. Now, I want you to look at the very top real quick. I wrote, buying certified organic and/or items related to non-GMO assures, and I crossed that out, that they are free from GMOs. This is not true. As I just explained to you a little while ago, the USDA allows a small percentage of GMOs to be in our organic products. So just to be aware of that as you move forward. Any questions on GMOs? Is anybody going to eat any GMOs on purpose?
No.
What about you, Chloe? It's like, don't put me on the spot like that. All right. So let's go to page number 51. Plan, purchase, and prepare for success. So now that we cleaned out our cupboards, now that we know how to read a label, now we know how to stay away from GMOs and food colorings and food dyes and all the things that do not serve us, we need to have lasting success. We need to create a lifestyle we can maintain, and that's to plan, purchase, and prepare. So the first thing we need to do is we just need to start planning. We need to make a grocery list, and we need to go ahead and put some meals together and some ideas and some things that we can eat that we're going to like. It's going to be satisfying, nutritious, and delicious foods that can be quick and easy to make. And I don't mean quick Quaker oats either. Not that quick. All right? If it only takes 5 minutes to cook it, you got to say, wait a minute. Why is that? One really thing real quick that I just remembered that I didn't shoot out. The word on your labels, enriched flour. That's one thing I like people to stay away from also, because when you see enriched flour, even though the word enriched sounds good, basically what it means is they've taken that wheat, they've stripped it of all of its nutrients, separated out the wheat germ, done all this stuff to it, so they can keep it shelf stable, and then they go back in and they add chemical nutrients to make it enriched, such as riboflavin, which by the way is a GMO product. So we really need to be careful with enriched also on our labels. Thank you for letting me go back on that. So let's get back to planning. We need to choose a day to create our menu for the week and do your shopping and do your meal preparation for the week. You need to keep healthy snacks at your desk, in your car console, in your briefcase, wherever you hang out at the most. Keep healthy snacks always available for yourself so you don't ever have to ask the question, can I eat that? Can I not eat it? Can I eat that? Can I not eat it? You already should know ahead of time. Plan your day in advance to include your 3 meals and your 2 snacks and eating every 2 to 3 hours. This helps you control your appetite and you make better decisions when you follow this program. You make a lot better decisions because that protein helps you with your brain fuel. Now it's time to go purchase. Nothing influences your gut's microbiome like your nutritional plan. If you've got ho-hos and raviolis all around you, that's probably what your belly's going to look like, is ho-hos and raviolis. Okay? So we need to remember our food environment is really important for what's going to happen for the ecosystem in our gut. The food you keep around will make all the difference. So let's go to the grocery store. Couple of rules of thumb: do not go hungry, and do not go with hungry children if you have them. Okay? Those are a couple of big things you really want to be careful with. Just like when you go out to eat and you want to make sure you make proper choices, when you go out to eat, you have that little protein shake, maybe 1 scoop of protein or even a whole protein shake. Great idea to do a protein shake before you go grocery shopping, because it does help you think a lot clearer and help you make sure that you're not so hungry as you go in, okay? The thing you want to do is you want to flow with the outer aisles in the grocery store. The outer aisles are where you're going to find your fresh fruits and your fresh vegetables. You're going to find your fresh unprocessed meat. Well, there's actually deli meats now on the walls. But anyways, you can find more wholesome meats, your eggs, your milks, things like that. All of your products that are going to have single ingredients or just a very few ingredients are going to be on the outside areas of the grocery store. You get into the middle, and then we're looking at processed foods. That's where you're going to spend a lot of time looking at labels and looking at labels and looking at labels. And I spoke about this before. If what you're purchasing doesn't look like it did when it was in its original form, you need to really think about what it's gone through to get to that point. Because most likely it's not something that's going to serve your transformation that y'all are on. Okay? So you need to be really careful with those inner aisles. The other thing I like to bring out is, where do they keep the milk in the grocery stores?
At the back.
At the back. Anybody know why? Good question.
Yeah.
So you get to go by all the advertising and all the other things along the way. Because how many of us run to the grocery store just to get a milk because we're out of milk? Same thing with breads and things like that, basics like that. So you need to remember that the grocery stores are set up to market and to sell. I mean, and that's okay. They're a business. But we need to be aware of some of the marketing tools that are being used to deceptively pull us in. I mean, when they have, the new double stuffed Oreos right by the milks, you kind of go, I wonder what those taste like. I'm getting milk anyways, right? I mean, it's something to encourage us to maybe do something we wouldn't normally do. I always find it funny going into Jumbo's on Willow. I shop there quite a bit. But when you walk in, the first thing you go by is a bakery. It smells good, it looks good, got all these wonderful food colorings. And if you're hungry, I mean, you kind of have a chance. I'm going to get that muffin, I'm going to get that brownie, I'm going to get whatever it is. But then the next thing you do is you go by the produce aisle. So then you can start throwing in the lettuce and the apples and all the healthy stuff, and it makes you feel better about that brownie that's stuck up underneath all of it. So they will play with your head in that way, where they're like, hey, this is what you want to get, and then we're going to make you feel better by purchasing some vegetables and fruits, so you don't feel so guilty about what's already in your cart. The other thing is standing in the lines at the grocery stores. What do you see when you stand in the line at the grocery store? What's there?
Candy.
Candy. Sodas. How many people see apples? You don't. You don't, right? And sometimes you wonder why you're kind of waiting longer in the line than you should. Well, shoot, I gotta make, this is me. I gotta make dinner. It's gonna be a half hour before I get home. It's gonna be 2 hours before dinner's ready. I'm hungry right now. Okay. That's what we go through. That's what we go through. And so we need to remember those deceptions are set up for us everywhere. So go to the grocery store prepared. And don't allow yourself to get sucked in.
There was on a show that I watched, when it was talking about buying your food, it said the louder your food is, the more you want to stay away from it. Meaning, the more it's advertised, stay away from it.
That's a great rule of thumb. To say that louder for everyone in video. The louder your food is, the more you want to stay away from it. So it's heavily laced with marketing and colors and bling bling.
Yes.
That means you want to stay away from it. That's great. That's great. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, we want to choose foods that are whole, opposed to prepackaged and pre-processed foods that contain lots of hidden sugars and fats and all sorts of things. We want foods that are milled, blanched, pasteurized, boiled, canned, frozen. Basically what we want to do is we want to do fresh first, frozen second, and canned is last. As I said last night in class, save the canned foods for the next Y2K. because you're gonna get very little nutrients in your canned foods. I mean, I realize sometimes we need to buy certain things in cans, but if you can do fresh first, frozen second, last is canned. As often as you can, choose organic, non-GMO, free-range, wild-caught sources of foods. This goes for your fish as well. You need to be really careful about farm-raised fish. They feed a lot of salmon corn, and how many salmons do you know eat corn?
I watched a deal today specifically on that, and it talked about salmon. They put grains in it and feathers.
Feathers.
They grind up feathers for them to eat. Feathers off birds.
Okay, I wonder why that would be. It would make them heavier?
I don't know.
Eat a lot of feathers?
Really cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they dye the meat to be pink.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And that was one thing I didn't bring out when we were talking about our meats in the meat sections. And it's like how many times does your meat really look that color when it's been slaughtered? It doesn't. It's got food coloring and food dyes in it. That's very common. Chicken, they commonly inject it with water to make it more filled out. And that's why when you cook a piece of chicken like this big, and then after you're done it's like this big, that's why.
It's all water.
Yeah, it's all water. Yeah.
There's something on the internet that talked about the 10 worst fish to eat and the 10 best fish to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And it talked about that farm-fed fish
Yeah. Being the worst?
being, it was definitely one of the worst.
Yeah. I just would be really careful with anything that's farm fresh. I mean, you can sometimes get some tilapia that's grown, that's raised sustainably, but you gotta have really clear labels on that. That's really important to have clear labels.
The one I was thinking of, because I buy fish a lot, and you do not see wild-caught tilapia.
You don't?
And usually at most restaurants, what do they have? What do they offer? They offer fish, sometimes salmon, but usually tilapia.
Yeah, tilapia is
That was on
Yeah.
the 10 worst list.
Right?
The worst fish.
Yes, yes.
cheap.
Tilapia was.
They can get it cheap, so that's when you get fish at a restaurant, you feel good about yourself, but you're
Yeah,
You get
you're
the
eating
cheap
this
stuff.
GMO filled up fish that's not natural,
yeah.
and then they do all sorts of things to make it taste good, because it probably don't taste worth a darn by itself, you know, between the batter and the frying and the seasoning and all the preservatives and everything else they put on it. Anyway, something to think about, right? So anyways, choosing these organic, free-range, wild-caught sources of foods is gonna make a big difference in our nutrition, so we definitely wanna work with that. Certified naturally grown, also another really good one to be looking for as well, and there again, I'll ask, look for your farmers, look for your farmer markets, do what you can to get things as fresh as possible. So let's talk about preparing. It's crucial you learn how to prepare food in a way that preserves its nutrients and keeps it as highly vital to your body as possible. Steaming, stir frying, slow roasting, grilling, pressure cooking, and using a crock pot, for instance, all preserve greater amounts of nutrients than does boiling. I'm not a big fan of grilling. I will tell you that real quick right now, only because of the fact that when you grill and you get the flesh, especially if you're grilling something flesh oriented, you get the flame on that. There's lots of carcinogenics that they have seen and found in grilled food. So you need to be really careful with making sure you don't get it char grilled. Be careful with that. Vegetables can lose up to 30 to 40% of their nutrients by exposure to high levels of heat, light, water, and oxygen. That's a lot. And if you remember last week, we talked about how our FDA standards for all of our foods, you know, how much B it has, how much C, how much A it has, was based on the 1950s. It's not even current. So then we're going to lose 30 to 40% on top of it just by the way we're cooking it. Cooking in crocodiles. Cooking in crock pots, said crocodile, all right. Cooking in crock pots is a really good way to preserve nutrients, especially if you are a busy family and you've got a lot going on. Crock pots is a great way to make any kind of a meal. And that way it's slow done, it's not exposed to high levels of heat. You've got it sealed so you retain some of that moisture and you retain some of the nutrients, and you've got more nutritious meals. So I would just definitely encourage you guys to look into crock pot cooking. Don't eat at Joe's. Go home.
So like the Instapots, you're probably gonna lose a lot of your nutrients with that.
Yeah, Instant Pot, yeah, because that's made to
high heat.
Yeah, high heat, and also, on top of that, whatever that you're using with all of that is gonna, I mean, it's just not gonna be as nutrient oriented, yeah. Anything instant, anything quick, anything fast, rice even, you need to be careful with that. Not that we're eating rice right now, but when you do start eating rice, you just, they even have, minute brown rice now. So don't eat at Joe's. This is as unhealthy as it is expensive. Restaurants want to make their foods delicious so that you return to them, which means adding butter, sugar, salts, other unhealthy ingredients at high levels that you would never put in at your own. MSG is one of them, monosodium glutamate. You guys remember the big MSG thing back in the 90s? Don't eat Chinese because it's got MSG. MSG is actually a food flavoring that encourages you to come back and eat more and more, because what it does, it hooks into these receptors in your brain, and they are excitotoxins. And so when these chemicals such as MSG get into the brain and hook into these receptor sites, you have an excited feeling. So you think it's the food, oh, I just love that fried chicken, it's so yummy. You think it's the food when in actuality it's the excitotoxins that they're using on that food. I had a friend in college that for 6 to 8 weeks, every day, she had to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and get mashed potatoes. Every day, for like 6 or 8 weeks, she ate mashed potatoes for lunch. And I'm like, how could somebody like mashed potatoes that much? It never really hit me until I started teaching this class and really understanding that. It was
And
full
that's
of,
out of a can.
and it's full of
That's
MSG.
that's
It's
not
not even mashed
fresh.
It's not even mashed potatoes. You know? But I mean, that's what she got hooked on, and that's what anybody gets hooked on. If you have a favorite food that's in a restaurant and or a fast food place especially, you need to evaluate that. Is it really the food that you like, or is it the chemicals they're particularly putting on that make you get a little rush, that make you feel good when you eat it? So that's really, really important. I know people like that with Big Macs. They're like, oh, Big Mac, it's the best thing. It's like, well, it's not really food, first of all. So how could it be the best thing? But it's what they put in it. It's what they preserve it with. These food things. So make sure you're not getting addicted. So tips for success. We want to keep our vegetables cold to prevent enzymes from destroying vitamins. If you guys remember in week 4, we talked about enzymes. Enzymes are the active little critters that get in there and break down our food so we can digest and absorb them at a higher rate. Okay? But enzymes are highly sensitive to heat and for a length of time. So when you put them in the fridge, you actually you don't freeze them, but you slow their process. That's why when you put certain fruits and vegetables in the refrigerator, it takes a lot longer for them to deteriorate or to rot, is because the enzymes are not as active, because the enzymes' activity is what causes that to happen. Okay? So, of course, freezing them will literally freeze them. I will not buy organic avocados from Jumbo's to this day. A couple years ago, I was buying them, and what they did, of course, they're picking this stuff, even if it is organic, they're picking it when it's not even ripe. They're shipping it in cold containers, and then they're storing it in the cold case. Now, avocados really shouldn't be stored in the cold case because it really slows their enzyme productivity. And when you do that over a time period, literally when you take it out and you go to use it, it's not even ripened at all, and you can't get it to ripen normally because it's been in the cold case way too long. There's just certain fruits and vegetables you need to be thinking about when you do that. When they irrigate foods and they take foods from one end of the country to the other end of the country, that's one of the things that they're doing is they're killing the enzymes, and they're also preserving the color. So it looks fresher when it gets to you. That's why we really need to buy our produce as local as possible if we can, especially in the summertime when it's optional. All right, try washing and scrubbing vegetables rather than peeling them. And I'm just going through a couple of these. You guys can go through the rest on your own. Be creative with your spice rack and repackage foods into smaller containers. When I first taught this class over at Rowdy Stick Horse, beginning of last year, 2 years ago, almost. I learned a lot from Paulette over there. She actually was able to really explain to us the best way to prepare food and keep it so that way it didn't get E. coli or salmonella growing in or any other bacteria. And this comes from the state of Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. And the best way to pre-prepare food and to store it is to cook it, let it cool to room temperature, put it in the refrigerator with a lid maybe that's just half on. You want air to still come in and out. Wait for a couple hours and then seal it up or put it in the freezer. But you don't ever want to put hot food or warm food in the refrigerator, and you don't ever want to put it room temperature food directly in the refrigerator and seal it up, because it can actually trap oxygen and bacteria and things like that in there that would normally get trapped in there. So that's a really good way. If you're going to cook a bunch of chicken breasts for the week, make sure you follow that plan, and that way you don't have to be concerned about anything growing on it during the week while you anticipate eating that chicken breast. Okay? All right. I think we're about done. Just checking my notes real quick. All right, so we got it. So page number 54, let's talk about our homework for the week. We need to create a SMART goal for the week. Hopefully this SMART goal will center around something that has to do with this week's module, with our cleaning our pantries out and looking at our labels. We're going to work on cleaning out our pantry. We're going to practice reading labels. We're going to start planning a healthy menu. We're going to create a shopping list, and we're going to purchase and prepare. And we're going to follow our plan in as much as possible. We're going to evaluate our exercise, as I was saying at the beginning of this. And of course, if you need to do any journaling and write down any special notes, there's a place for you to do that as well. So any questions on labels or pantry cleaning out or anything like that before I wrap it up? Everybody good? All right. So next week, my favorite module to teach of the whole 13 weeks is on sugar, the dark side of sugar. I love teaching this module. It's, I think it's the most impactful module when we can really understand the deception of sugar and how it sneaks in and we don't even know it and what it does to our bodies. So I hope everybody can be present next week and sit in on sugars, the dark side of sugars next week. Tonight we're gonna, if everybody's gonna stick around, we're gonna do a little dragon fruit smoothie with some dragon fruit. It's actually a fruit that's got very high antioxidants and very highly nutrient value, and it actually can be used, you can still see it on my fingers from last night, as a food coloring, a natural food coloring. So with that being said, y'all have a healthy week. Enjoy your week cleaning out your pantries, and I'll see you then.